The Nox event had not played out the way the radio broadcasts promised. There were no military containment zones, no scientists in hazmat suits, and certainly no cure. There was only the smell of rotting peaches and the sound of dry, leathery feet dragging across asphalt. Elias crouched behind the reinforced chain-link fence of the Rosewood construction site. He wiped sweat from his brow, his fingers stained with motor oil and dried blood. He wasn't a soldier, and he wasn't a hero. He was a tinkerer who had stumbled upon a very strange crate in an abandoned research facility near Louisville, a crate labeled, Project Balloon Defense. He had thought it was a joke. He'd installed the mod interface onto his handheld terminal, expecting a diagnostic tool, but what he got was a tactical interface that defied the laws of physics. Targeting array online, a synthetic, bored-sounding voice chirped from his terminal. Elias checked his perimeter. The base was a fortress of his own design. In the center, a generator hummed, fueled by a precarious stockpile of stolen gas cans. Beside it, a rain collector barrel sat on a wooden scaffold, dripping filtered water into a reservoir. A small garden of cabbages and potatoes, his food source, struggled toward the weak Kentucky sun in the corner of the yard. But it wasn't the garden that kept the dead at bay. It was the monkeys. They didn't look like real monkeys. They were cartoonish, wide-eyed, and stood on carved wooden plinths at the four cardinal corners of the compound. Each one held a sharpened dart, tipped with a chemical compound Elias had scraped from the medicine cabinets of a dozen pharmacies. The mod didn't just add monkeys, it warped the local reality. The infection had mutated. The air around the horde was filled with semi-translucent, tethered orbs, balloons. They weren't solid, but they carried the virus in a gaseous state. If they brushed against you, you didn't just get bitten, you inhaled the end of the world. Hostiles approaching, the terminal warned. Elias stood up, clutching his crowbar. He looked toward the treeline. The dead came first, the shambling, groaning shells of humanity. But floating behind them, bobbing in the breeze, were the balloons. Red, blue, and yellow spheres that defied gravity, their strings trailing behind them like umbilical cords of destruction. Engage, Elias whispered. The monkeys moved with a terrifying, mechanical fluidity. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The sound was singular, like a needle hitting a drum. A dart flew from the north monkey, piercing a red balloon. It popped with a high-pitched squeak, disappearing into a puff of neutralized steam. The east monkey pivoted, its wooden arm flicking forward with impossible speed. Another dart, another pop. Elias watched the horde. The zombies ignored the monkeys entirely, their dead eyes fixed on the scent of warm, living meat behind the fence. They clawed at the chain link, the metal groaning under the weight of 36 corpses. The generator is fluctuating, the terminal chimed. Targeting efficiency dropping to 80%. Elias cursed. He sprinted to the generator, pulling the starter cord. It sputtered, coughed, and roared back to life. He checked the fuel gauge, almost empty. He had enough gas for maybe 2 more days if he rationed the power. I need to move, he muttered to himself. I need to get to the gas station on the edge of town. He looked at the monkeys. They were staring at him, those empty, painted eyes. Sometimes, he wondered if they were watching him or just waiting for the next target. He had modified them with scrap metal and electrical wiring, but the core, the monkey logic, was something he'd downloaded from the ether. It was a digital ghost trapped in a wooden doll. He packed his bag, a half-empty water bottle, a soggy cabbage, and his combat knife. He checked his watch. 4 p.m., the golden hour. The light was dying, and the shadows were turning long and predatory. He climbed the ladder to his watchtower, looking out over the town of Rosewood. It was a graveyard of suburban dreams. Abandoned cars rusted on the highway, and the silence was only broken by the distant, rhythmic thwip of his monkeys popping the stray balloons that drifted over his perimeter. He saw movement by the gas station. Not a zombie, a survivor. They were crouched by a fuel pump, trying to siphon gas. They didn't see the balloons drifting toward them from the north, a cluster of yellow ones, faster and more dangerous than the reds. Elias had a choice. He could stay safe behind his walls, or he could intervene. If he moved, his monkey towers wouldn't reach that far. The mod's range was strictly limited to the perimeter of his power grid. Override, Elias commanded. Shift grid focus to coordinate 44 to 98. The terminal glowed red. Warning. Perimeter defense will be compromised. Energy consumption will spike. Do it. The monkeys stiffened. They retracted their darts and turned their heads toward the gas station, their little wooden gears grinding. They began to fire, the darts traveling further than they ever had, fueled by a surge of energy that made the generator whine in protest. Thwip thwip thwip. The yellow balloons burst in a cascade of color against the sunset. The survivor looked up, startled, catching sight of the darts arcing through the air from the direction of the construction site. Elias held his breath. The generator was redlining. Smoke poured from the exhaust. He was draining his only power source to save a stranger. Shut it down, Elias yelled as the last balloon popped. The system hissed as it powered down. The monkeys returned to their idle positions, their darts lowered. The survivor at the gas station stood up, looked toward Elias's base, and started running, not away from it, but toward it. Elias scrambled down the ladder, his heart hammering against his ribs. He unbolted the heavy gate, his hands shaking. The survivor reached the fence, gasping for air. It was a woman, younger than him, wearing a tactical vest that looked like it had been through a war zone. She panted, leaning against the chain link. The balloons. What are they? The end of the world, Elias said, ushering her inside. You shouldn't have been out there. I saw them popping, she said, looking at the wooden monkeys on their plinths. My group, we called them the Screamers. They make people lose their minds. We were looking for a way to stop them, but we didn't have, whatever those things are. Elias looked at his generator, then at the half-empty gas can. They're monkeys, he said, and he realized how insane he sounded. And they're hungry for rubber. The woman laughed, a dry, cracked sound. I'm Sarah, and since I'm here, I have a spare fuel siphon and a backpack full of seeds. I think we're going to need more monkeys. Elias looked at his setup, the garden, the generator, the strange, silent sentinels that kept the air clean of the balloon virus. They were a small island of order in a world of chaotic, rotting decay. We're going to need a lot more than just monkeys, Elias said, closing the gate and sliding the bolt home. That night, they sat by the dim light of the terminal. Outside, the balloons drifted like ghosts, and the dead clawed at the fence. But inside, the monkeys stood watch, their darts primed, waiting for the flicker of motion that signaled another attempt by the world to swallow them whole. The mod had changed the rules of the game. Survival was no longer just about food and water, it was about geometry, timing, and the terrifying, relentless efficiency of a wooden toy programmed to kill. How many can they handle? Sarah asked, watching the monkeys track a passing gust of wind. As many as the power holds, Elias replied, leaning back and closing his eyes. So, we just have to make sure the power never goes out. And in the silence of Rosewood, the only sound was the distant, rhythmic thwip of the protectors, keeping the nightmare at bay, one pop at a time.